Like, yeah, when you come with like your Gamergate understanding of what a feminist critique of anime is, in which show skin means bad, and you don't want any of the characters to be ugly. You just want them to be like overweight and like brown, which is sexist and racist in and of itself. See how much is rolled into this like tiny little insistence that I don't like fan service. Like,
and I wanna add a note, right? We're not satirizing here. Actually, we have seen this. Hello. My name is Raghav Mavali. My pronouns are they, them, theirs.
And I'm Black, he, him, his.
And this is the first episode of the Critical Weeb Theory podcast. A podcast that aims to put all the politics in all the anime.
Exactly. There's anime, and there is critical theory. Never have the two things met, actually. Yes, they have. But now we will do it all the time for at least an hour, if not an hour and a half, and it will hopefully be, at the very least, interesting, if not funny, and if not either of those things, extremely upsetting to fascists, which is always a good thing.
And that's really what we're aiming for here more than anything else, which is to say, we're aiming to basically, like, use a very strong critical lens on a lot of aspects of anime that sort of get, like, glossed over. For example, how do some anime treat race from beyond the superficial level?
Exactly. We should probably just get into what we want to do this episode, yeah?
Yeah, so what we're here to talk about are bad anime defenses. We're going to make a lot of critique, and whenever anyone makes a critique, there are always a number of people who come forward with bad defenses. In this case, bad anime defenses.
We know they're bad defenses because they're literally always the same ones. You guys think I don't read what you're posting on my channel discussion pages? What you're posting on Medium? I read that shit.
Another way of talking about why these defenses are bad is because they're basically illogical and unfounded. And so we want to take a moment to talk through them now, one, so that next time when we talk about something more serious in a later episode and someone puts forth a bad anime defense, because it will happen.
It will.
We can sort of like link to this and be like, no, we already talked about why that's a bullshit excuse. But perhaps on a deeper level, I would like nothing more than to never hear about these again. That would make me really happy.
Do you know how disappointing it is to like put your soul, to put your life's work, okay, I don't want to say life's work, but you know, you put your heart into an essay and you post it and you're like, hey guys, I wrote a thing. And then all the comments are just the same 5 excuses for bullshit over and over again. Do you know how upsetting that is? Just to me specifically, think about my feelings, please.
But also think about the fact that it's not at all persuasive.
A waste of everyone's time.
And for one, I would love to be proven wrong, but these sorts of like bullshit hand-wavy excuses are exactly that. They're basically ways of redirecting the conversation away from the critique that has been made.
Right.
There are basically 2 groups of people who make bad anime defenses. They're either reactionaries who know they're full of shit and don't really care, and they'll just throw it out. But there are also like otherwise well-meaning people who are sort of approaching the problem from the foregone conclusion that the anime that is being criticized is good. And they like that anime. Therefore, it must be good.
Right.
These people on the internet who are bringing up critiques of why that anime you like is kind of racist, actually, must be wrong. And I want to take a moment to say it's okay to like problematic things, but just because you like it doesn't mean you get to ignore its flaws.
I wrote a whole thing defending SAO, okay? Please. Liking problematic things is not the issue here.
For example, Boys Bliss is a manga I like, and while I personally believe that it handles this problematic material well, that's not necessarily an opinion that someone else would share. And if they come to me and they say, like, yeah, no, I can't agree with your take at all, like, I'm not going to say they're wrong. I'm not going to bring up one of these bad anime defenses against them, because I would be undermining their lived experience.
Exactly. Should we jump right in?
Yes, let's jump right in. Why don't you start us off?
Basically, some people, and by some people, I mean quite a lot of people, will just like accuse me of making things up about the show that I am talking about, or otherwise being some kind of like bad faith actor who's in it for, I don't know, the money.
You make like no money.
Okay, wait. Just think about. Oh yeah, I'm a major grifter. I'm really after, like, they say oil was like the biggest industry of the 20th century, and now silicon is the new oil. But you know what's going to be the new silicon? Complaining about anime on Twitter. Yeah, that's the real money making thing.
The new silicon is hot takes.
Exactly. I mean, just think about how ridiculous that actually sounds, first of all. And second of all, think about how, like, presumptuous that is. Like, the idea that I would use whatever your preferred show it is that I'm critiquing, that I would use that show specifically to, like, and I would, like, come after your personal feelings about it to, like, build some sort of career out of it. Listen, I just have opinions on stuff, okay? It's not any more complicated than that. And Raghava is the same way, okay? It's just, there's nothing really to respond here other than stop. No. Just
On that same note, I'm not out here to, like, ruin the creator of a work's life or anything. That's not why we critique things in the first place.
I still don't know the name of the pen name of the person who wrote Shield Hero. And I've written so much about Shield Hero.
Because it's not really about whether or not the author of insert work was or wasn't a racist, right? You can be an anti-racist in real life, but then reproduce the internalized toxicity and the internalized harmful tropes that you learn from other media. I think it's often problematic that otherwise well-meaning progressive people with progressive politics will basically not bring those politics into the creative work they have.
I think that's something. Is that something that people just don't understand until they, like, start writing their own stories? Because to me, it's pretty intuitive. Like, I've tried writing things, and then I write them, and then I realize that, like, the thing that I tried to write in and of itself doesn't, like, match up with, like, I think my political predilections, because I just copy things that I've seen in other places kind of mindlessly. You don't think about it. There's a whole career called sensitivity reading that just exists for that purpose, right?
I feel like that's definitely something to cover, and why I think it's whenever someone comes to us and they're like, yo, stop making anime political. This has happened. Again, I will remind you that this is a podcast about inserting all the politics into all the anime. My reasoning is that it's not really true that any anime is unpolitical. I will give an example of Black Lagoon. Black Lagoon is a very deeply political show. There's a lot to say of, even in, like, the very first episode. It stars a white-collar worker who is left to die by a company whose only interest is in profits and was dealing with nuclear weapons. And then he sort of seamlessly blends in to a criminal underworld. And the show asserts unambiguously that the same skills that go into succeeding in a corporate environment are the same level of ruthlessness you need to survive in a cutthroat underworld.
And the show plays with this too, right? It has the whole arc of, like every character around Rock feels like, because Rock grew up in, like, a middle income Japanese white collar job, that he wouldn't really understand the culture of Roanoper and this and that. But then by the end of the show, it's kind of realized there was, like, I don't want to go off a tangent too much, but there's a lot of, like, playing of, like, walking in the twilight, light versus dark, and how it's actually to Rock's advantage that he can see both sides instead of just being either too naive or too cynical and poison.
I think, yeah, this isn't a Black Lagoon episode, though I'm sure we will do one at one point. And again, also not to say that Black Lagoon is in any way, shape, or form a perfect show, but Black Lagoon has very, I would say, explicit leftist politics. It has very strong socialist ideals like underpinning it. There's a tweet Mo made of a screen cap of like, yes, the famously subtle Black Lagoon, and it's a picture of one of the characters reading quotations from Mao Zedong, right?
Right.
The show wears its politics on its sleeve, and yet, in all of the discussions about Black Lagoon, those are never discussed. So when I say I am putting politics into anime, I am not suddenly making Black Lagoon political. Black Lagoon was always political. I'm just choosing to talk about it because people don't.
And just even for some shows, I think like Black Lagoon, they really only make sense in a political context.
Right.
I'm not really sure how you talk about how good Black Lagoon is without also talking about the things that it's saying. I mean, people have, but why? What does that mean?
When people talk about Black Lagoon without talking about its politics, they sort of come to the conclusion that it doesn't know what it's doing.
That there's lots of guns and lots of blood.
Or that it's perhaps a very simplistic show. But I don't think that's true. I think Black Lagoon is actually very complex. It's got a lot going on. But of course, if you ignore the politics, which is the meat of its content, which is the meat of its narrative, of course you're left thinking that, yeah, it's a very simple show and not much going on in it.
On that note, there's also the idea of like, well, isn't this just anime? Like, okay, maybe it's right that like this or that show has this or that political trend. It fits into this or that like narrative or whatever, and that it is indeed as either problematic or as leftist as you claim.
Hey Mo. So Terraformars made all of its villains, its cockroaches, just obvious stand-ins for Black people.
Yes, it did.
So what? Why does it matter? Why should I care?
Well, so there's like two different angles that you can get at this from, right? The first is that with reactionary anime, 99% of the time, all their fans are also reactionary.
Right.
Like when I talk about how Konosuba is like sexist, people will be like, well, you know, who cares if Konosuba is sexist or not? It's just like a funny show. But then all the fans of Konosuba are like fucking 4chaners who are out here like talking about how like women are like falsely accusing men of this and that, and how like this like it's always like that.
Just as a quick disclaimer in case Nuance is dead, no, we are not saying that just because you like Konosuba you are necessarily on 4chan.
Right. I'm not. Yeah. I'm not. Okay. Liking a problematic show does not make you a bad person. What I am saying is that problematic shows make space for problematic fan bases, and where problematic fan bases do exist, you think that like turns off when they get offline. I mean, that translates to like political action, whether it be voting, whether it even be like talking to their friends about stuff, whether it be like the way they interact with other people. That stuff like stays around. So there's obviously some effect there. But I think just more generally, and like the stronger point here, is that if you claim to like anime, then you have to also accept the fact that anime is important. The idea that it's just anime, so it doesn't matter, kind of inherently concedes the point that like anime is a medium that like is incapable of like communicating anything important, and that it only exists to like be funny and cute and like wank material, and like that's it. And I'm not really sure why the people who claim to be like the only true anime fans, like the only real anime fans, and how I'm like a fake fan because I don't like this or that show or whatever, are also the same people who refuse to give the medium the ability to communicate things. You can't have it both ways. I've noticed this. There are people who want anime to both be like a deep and complex and like philosophical thing when the politics agree with them or when the politics are invisible. And then as soon as the politics make them uncomfortable, anime is just a lighthearted fun. Who cares? It's just animation. It's just Japanese cartoons. Like, cannot be both.
Yeah. I would also note that the entire purpose of critical theory, or I wouldn't say the entire purpose, but one of the main driving points of critical theory is to criticize the way in which media, or rather social structures, uphold societal norms. We're not just talking about like something anime in a vacuum. We're also talking about like how media shapes perceptions. I have a background in a lot of survivor advocacy work, and one of the things we talk about is this idea of rape culture. This idea that there is an unspoken trend in media that sort of normalizes abusive patterns of behavior or like brushes over sexual assault. All of that combines together to create rape culture. And the end effect of it is when that stuff occurs in real life, because it's been normalized in media, people just sort of accept it as something that happens because media is a mirror. So in that same regard, I think it's very important to talk about like, what is this piece of media saying in spite of like what its fans might believe personally. And even then, as we've already mentioned, a lot of times when you look at the way these fan bases respond on like Reddit, I don't think it's too far to say that toxic anime attracts toxic fan bases.
And I think it's also true. And one of the reasons why we kind of wanted to start this is because a lot of fan bases just kind of, I don't know if I want to call it lying, but
they have accepted some conventional dogmatic truths.
Right, about the shows that they watch. Like, the things that they tell themselves that their show does, and the things that the show actually does when a new person watches it aren't the same. And this is kind of because you have, like, kind of content creators, large and small, who kind of have takes that are not really grounded in any sort of, like, critical theory or analysis, and then people just repeat those.
I would make another step and be like, that's why one of what we aim for is to do like a purely materialist analysis. If you aren't familiar with that idea, basically we are reasoning about shows based on what is in the shows, not what we want to believe about the shows. Because when you start by saying, I think Black Lagoon is good, therefore I'm going to argue from the perspective that Black Lagoon is good, you miss, for example, that Black Lagoon doesn't have any Southeast Asian characters of import, despite being set in a Southeast Asian country or location. So, like, that's why you can't work backwards from the conclusion, because then you end up supporting the wrong conclusion.
The other thing about these takes that can kind of be a bit problematic is when takes catch on because they're like convenient like political tools or like political weapons against this or that group that people want to hurt. So for example, every season or two there's like a controversial anime, right? There was like,
this time it looks like it's King's Raid.
Yeah, not looking forward to the conversation around that, but like Shield Hero was the controversial anime. Uzaki-chan was one. Interspecies Reviewers was one. Yeah, and in which basically a fandom will tell themselves, for example, about Uzaki-chan, that Uzaki-chan is like a comedic masterpiece in which Twitter got very like mad, like in flames, because
Crunchyroll wants to censor Uzaki-chan's boobs.
Because the boobs, they were just too big, or like Interspecies Reviewers, it was because Funimation hates Weeb culture and they want to force Western standards on Japanese culture and this and that, and Interspecies Reviewers is actually like,
none of these shows are good. None of these shows are good.
That's the thing. Like, not only are they not good, but they don't do the things that the fans say so.
Right. I don't dislike Uzaki-chan because she has big boobs. I dislike Uzaki-chan because she's a stalker and she violates personal space, and honestly, not really funny.
The show isn't funny. I don't dislike Interspecies Reviewers because it's basically porn. I dislike Interspecies Reviewers because every episode of the show is the same. It's all just go to a brothel, raid a bunch of women, say creepy things, have like a really censored sex scene that like a really talented Pixiv artist could do better, and then end the episode. And I don't hate Shield Hero because, well, I don't know, maybe that one actually lined up because they said no. Okay, no, I don't hate Shield Hero because I'm a pink-haired feminist who wants to falsely accuse men of rape. I hate Shield Hero because it's a supremely boring, horribly written show that also justifies slavery to sell you a waifu. Right? Like, none of these things. It's not the dark, gritty, edgy isekai that you want it to be just because you want to make that the SJWs mad and triggered.
Yeah, and I think that's another area where a lot of these bad defenses come from, is that there's a reactionary crowd that every season, because in order to be like a reactionary fascist, right, you need to sell the narrative that someone's coming for your anime. So always you need to establish this narrative that insert anime is under attack. Otherwise, what are you going to defend?
Again, a little presumptuous. Like the idea that I would even bother writing an essay about Uzaki-chan if like 500 people on YouTube and Twitter didn't make like a huge epic deal out of it.
I would have liked to see it die in a dark hole and then never think about it ever again.
There's nothing special about it.
But again, like this season, it looks like it's King's Raid, and next season it will be something else, I'm sure. And we don't just hate anime. We like, quite frankly, we like anime. At the very least, we like Black Lagoon. That's the one good anime.
The only one. Well, okay, so let's say that we accept the fact that A, anime can be political, and B, it is important to talk about it, and C, fandoms often lie about what is in the content of their own shows for weird kind of power trippy reasons. How about us not just understanding the anime? Isn't all anime just like a really elaborate satire that cannot be criticized? He asks facetiously, knowing the answer to this question.
No. So this is actually, I think, the most interesting bad defense for me. A lot of times you'll say, for example, The Misfit of Demon Academy is a power trip in which Anas Voldigold is an overpowered protagonist, wish fulfillment, and basically does a lot of bad things. And someone will be like, but it's satire. I've had someone tell me that Shield Hero was satire.
A satire of what?
And I have, and I was like, hey, my awesome friend Mo wrote an essay about why Shield Hero justifies slavery, and they were just like, oh, well, I just thought it was satire. Well, okay, so I think there's one interesting way of approaching this is, wow, this show is so astronomically bad. I cannot believe that someone has done this on purpose. Therefore, it must be satire. Which is, have you considered that it's just fascist propaganda? That's one thing.
Like as a subpoint to that, there's also often this idea of somebody watching something, knowing it's bad, but then also knowing that they enjoy it. So then insisting that it is satire to explain how they can like a bad thing, instead of just owning up to the fact.
You can like problematic things if this is like our third or fourth time saying it.
We'll keep saying it.
We would much rather you own it's problematic and like it anyway than like fight us.
I'm not going to hunt anyone down for liking a show that I think is bad. And I'm not going to say that I'm morally superior to anyone for liking a show that I think that does this or that issue wrong. But like, what I will get frustrated with is just either like deflection or obfuscation of the point in service of like your own personal feeling of not wanting to take responsibility that a show might be doing things that are uncomfortable.
Yeah. But that's just me talking about why I think sometimes people use that it's just satire defense. I want to actually go into why a lot of these shows aren't satire. First and most importantly, even if it was written with satirical intent, if it is problematic, then a lot of times the harm has been done, right? We are at a point at which, like, sometimes the things you are satirizing end up being pretty close to reality. I'm looking at The Onion. So you'll, like, write a satirical work, but if you fail your satire, What you have done is you've just reproduced the harm. Point of satire is that it should be obvious that it is satire. If it's not, and like, oh, your satire of racism just does all of the racism things, then your show is racist.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you intended for it to be satire. That's not really an excuse, because you ended up reproducing the harm. Bad satire is not satire. Bad satire is just the problematic trope you intended to satirize.
Because when you fail to do satire, the people who you are criticizing will take it as an endorsement all the time, just
every single time. There's this wonderful thing called Poe's Law, and I think about it a lot. It's basically like, if it's not very obvious that something is satire, someone will take it seriously. What's interesting to me is a lot of times when someone says something is satirical or subversive, like for example Konosuba, people will say that Konosuba is subversive, or the Misfit at Demon Academy is subversive. They're looking at something that subverts the aesthetics. So outwardly, Kazuma in Konosuba is sad because he got dealt with a shitty goddess, but the underlying structure, the underlying relationships are upheld. Kazuma is still the main character. He's still the hero. He's still in charge of everything. He's still the smartest person in the group.
We can look at how Kazuma, for example, if you want like a very specific example, like how does Kazuma view the woman in his party, right? He kind of low-key views them as sex objects. And this is a statement that I do not have to defend. I can just pull out the clip of him telling Darkness, "You are boobs," to her face as she kind of blushes and cries, right? I could. The one thing that separates Kazuma from from like any other isekai protagonist that gets into like the fan service scene where he's just like staring or whatever is that Kazuma doesn't try to hide it, and he doesn't try to act like a noble or virtuous person. But that's not satire. Again, that's doing the thing.
Doing the thing, but being self-aware that you are doing the thing is not inherently subversive. If I shove my hand into a wood chipper and then say, I'm shoving my hand into a wood chipper, right? I have not subverted the act of shoving my hand into a wood chipper. I have just done the thing. And again, we can go to Misfit at Demon Academy, and that's another show that's not subversive, because fundamentally, Anos' relationships with the other characters are upheld from a standard isekai power fantasy. He is still the strongest character. He is still...
What's the difference? Think about your standard like isekai power fantasy. What is the difference between Anos' relationship with Sasha and whatever power fantasy you chose, their relationship to whatever tsundere is in that show? Like, what's the functional difference? How does the relationship in the one criticize the relationship in the other?
Right. The Misfit at Demon Academy, if anything, is more hierarchical. It is more overpowered. And just doing the thing, but more to the point at which it is ridiculous, is not inherently satire. If anything, it shows a lack of self-awareness, and it's just bad writing. Like, a lot of people will look at the Misfit at Demon Academy and be like, this is so bad. Surely, no one could have done this on purpose, to which I say, hard disagree.
If anything, I've had people tell me that one of the reasons why they like the Misfit at Demon Academy is that it cuts all the pretension and crap that a lot of other power fantasies do, in which they put it in, because a lot of authors still write power fantasies, and they'll know that they're writing a power fantasy, and instead of just not writing a power fantasy, they'll add all this padding to make it like, oh, I'm guilty that I'm writing a power fantasy. See, it's not really a power fantasy because there's this and that, and the characters say they're not that strong, and blah, blah, blah. And it's not really a harem because the girls are feisty, and they don't really flirt that much, right? Or whatever, but like...
It's not really a harem, even though every single one of the female characters I wrote likes the protagonist.
Right. But with Misfit, what it does is it just kind of doesn't pretend. Anos is impossibly strong. He breaks the rules he breaks the established physics of the world. all of the girls are in love with him. He has an entire political movement that is just reduced to his own personal fan club. He single-handedly blows up the CEO of racism, and then he makes it in time for mushroom gratin with his parents. Okay, like the show just doesn't care, right? And people have told me that they like that out of the show, that they like how it's straightforward and how it just delivers. It's like IV like feeding into your blood all of the things in a power fantasy that you would want. That's not satire. That's not criticizing. You cannot both be a satire and also everything I love about power fantasies unironically.
Yeah. Hey, well, you were criticizing Uzaki-chan earlier. Wasn't that just because you hate fan service?
Interesting question, I said, knowing the answer. Okay, I'll stop doing this gag. So the thing about this is that the thing that actually really frustrates me about this is that whenever I hear this defense, I know it's because whoever is doing it hasn't read the thing that I'm talking about.
People giving bad faith criticism without reading the work? What? On the internet? Never!
But for me, my specific frustration is that they're criticizing me for something that not only that I never wrote or said, but that isn't even related to my style of like criticism. This is basically like a pop feminist critique, right? Like the conception is that feminists that do media criticism are just upset.
Haha. Conception.
Oh no. But right.
For those of you who don't know, blissfully, I regret to tell you that Conception is a game series made by Atlas, the creators of Persona. Not only was there a Conception 1, there was also a Conception 2, so they made a second one, and also an anime, which Mo watched the first episode of, and that's the joke.
Go look up Conception on your own time. Okay, right.
Don't. Back to where we were.
Right. It's the idea that when feminists complain about something being sexy, it's just because they're mad that the girl shows skin. And this like goes all the way back to like the ideas of like Anita Sarkeesian and like Sargon of Akkad and Teal Deer and all those like Gamergate 2015 sort of bullshit nonsense. In which,
just to clarify, Anita Sarkeesian was the one being criticized during Gamergate.
Oh yeah. But Anita Sarkeesian is not a Gamergater. She was the target of fascist and chauvinistic harassment.
Yeah,
for years for doing nothing but sharing her own opinions. It's this idea that and it also comes with like a sexist undercurrent. Fortunately for me, I guess because I'm a man, I don't get this a lot, but it also comes with this weird assumption that the women who criticize like media are just upset because they're uglier than whatever character that they're criticizing. I swear to God, I've heard people say this up to now about like Uzaki-chan. They'll just be like, they're just upset because they don't look as good as Uzaki-chan.
It's such an untenable take. I know lots of like gay people, and not one of them was ever like, I'm horny for Uzaki-chan.
Or just like, not every girl's
not
aesthetic
even once.
is just huge tits. What? Okay, but like that's besides the point, right?
That's very much the imposition of cis heteronormative masculine fetish. And assuming it's a universal.
But like, yeah, when you come with like your Gamergate understanding of what a feminist critique of anime is, in which show skin means bad, and you don't want any of the characters to be ugly. You just want them to be like overweight and like brown, which is sexist and racist in and of itself. See how much is rolled into this like tiny little insistence that I don't like fan service? Like
and I wanna add a note, right? We're not satirizing here. Actually, we have seen this. Like, you would think that surely no one would make a take that bad, and yet you would be surprised.
At all of the takes. But just the number one reason, the number one thing that bothers me about this take is that I don't dislike fan service. It's not true. I think fan service is pretty neat actually. If it's not like upholding like patriarchy or racism or whatever.
Wait, Mo, you have a sex drive?
I do. It's
What?
I do. Like if there's just a scene of like attractive characters being attractive and interacting with each other, that's good. It's like a different aspect of this of the show that you can enjoy. That's fine. You'll notice that okay, this is a tall order because the stuff I write is long, but I challenge you. If for whatever reason I ever say this character is bad because they show so much skin, or this character is bad because the boobs are too big, or because they're too pretty, or whatever, like I will end Mo Black. I'll shut it down, okay? Just bring it up to me. You can take this clip, you can give it to me, you say you promise, I'll be like, oh dang, I did promise. But until then, it's not fan service that I'm mad at. It's doing a sexist thing, doing a problematic thing, upholding rape culture, upholding patriarchy, upholding capitalism, or whatever.
Yeah. And if I say I dislike the way that this is sexist, and you're like, and your response is you just hate boobs, I'm like, great, you're not listening to me. I'm going to block you.
That's a block at this point. I wish I should look up blocking people on Medium more instead of...
That brings us to, I think, my next point. It's building up to something, or it'll get better later. You just have to watch more. This is a complaint I hear a lot, both about shows that have already aired. I will like watch 4 episodes or read 4 chapters, and I will be like, no thanks, I'm done. And someone will be like, well, no, you didn't read all of it. You have to read all of it before you can criticize. This version of the bad defense is wrong because later parts being good doesn't make earlier parts better. If, for example, someone watched the first season of Sword Art Online and was turned off, right?
Right.
No amount of the second season of Sword Art Online handles a lot of it better will, like, overwrite that experience. And the second season being better doesn't retroactively fix the first season. The example I like to give is, like, wading through a river of, like, shit to find a gold nugget does not change the fact that you waded through a river of shit. And that is presupposing that the gold nugget was there in the first place. And oftentimes it's not.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to point out because a lot of people don't actually like share this opinion. Raghav and I are of the opinion that like SAO basically gets better after Alfheim. There's like because the most common take is that Ironclad was the best SAO and it was downhill from there.
Well, it's because people stopped watching SAO after Alfheim for very justifiable reasons.
Right. But the first season of SAO is kind of the worst, and I generally think the other seasons of SAO do really interesting things. They have a lot of interesting things to say about like trauma, about like consent, about like if you only know SAO through SAO Bridge, you probably think I'm like tripping balls right now, but no, it's true. About like imperialism and like war and like capitalism and all keeping within like the general central theme of like the real world and the virtual world and the fictional world are like both equally as valid, and they support each other, and they should be in the hands of like the public and not government or corporations. It's very good, but also it does abuse bad, and it does it really bad in the first season with what is essentially with Asuna and like her abuse and how it's sexualized, and it does that multiple times. And I can't hide behind it gets better later to somebody who has that complaint to say that they should just shut up and go away. The complaint is still correct.
Yeah, but another part of it's building up to something or it'll get better later is it sort of invalidates basically any criticism. If I say I don't like this show and you're like, you just have to watch more of it.
And you have to read the light novel. You need to experience more of it in book form, and then you need to do research on the wiki.
My general note is, one, the people making the first part also made the other stuff. And with the exception of some people like Reki Kawahara, the creator of Sword Art Online, who has made constant apologies and like has voiced a public desire to like get better and change. And again, this doesn't excuse anything in Sword Art Online. The bad shit, the problematic shit in Sword Art Online is still problematic. Just because
still there.
Yeah, just because Reki Kawahara acknowledges that it's problematic and wants to get better doesn't remove that. With rare exceptions, generally speaking, the person who created the second season of the show I didn't like the first season of made the first season, and thus a lot of the things I didn't like are going to remanifest themselves. This gets into stuff like long works that are like hundreds of episodes, in which case it's like, no, you shouldn't have to read all of that to say that the part I did read was bad.
Right.
But also, oftentimes when people say it gets better, it's wishful thinking. There is no real indication that it will actually get better.
It's a self-justification for watching a thing that you know is not as good as it could be.
I wouldn't even say that they know it's not as good as it can be. My example will be Rent-A-Girlfriend. A lot of people watched Rent-A-Girlfriend under the assumption that there would be a character arc for Kazuya, and there was no justification within Rent-A-Girlfriend, the show itself, that such a thing would occur. People didn't like Kazuya, and they expected the show to agree with them that Kazuya had to change.
Just the general idea of looking at the show through, again, anti-materialist lenses, looking at the show through the lens of what it would need to do for you to enjoy it, and then backwards justifying.
The fact of the matter is that Rent-A-Girlfriend, especially, the problematic aspects are the core appeal. The fact that Kazuya basically gets all of the girls with none of the effort is the core appeal of the show. If the show was to suddenly, quote-unquote, get better and fix all of its problems, the people who are buying all of the Rent-A-Girlfriend merchandise would suddenly stop watching. This is the show. Sword Art Online, right? Sword Art Online's core premise is not abuse. That's why it can move past that. But if you have a show whose core premise is abuse, and you're like, oh boy, it's going to overgrow this abuse, like, no, I have bad news for you.
Every relationship is built on it.
Yeah, like Rent-A-Girlfriend in this example would have to basically rewrite itself. It would have to destroy everything.
I want to compare a little bit, not to get into too much detail, but I want to compare a little bit Rent-A-Girlfriend with Princess Connect Redye, which is a very cute and very good show that I enjoy.
Oh, and that's a great example of like being subversive too.
Right. Because I want, if you've seen Rent-A-Girlfriend, you know that the protagonist Kazuya, he's like kind of a very relatable loser, right? In the sense that he masturbates all the time, especially towards his ex. When he sees a woman, he always has this internal dialogue about how.
I mean, speak for yourself.
Okay, well, please.
We're friends. I'm allowed to do this.
You are. Well, he has like this internal dialogue of like, wow, the girls are so sexy, blah 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 blah. Imagine a slightly different version of Rent-A-Girlfriend that like actually held Kazuya to account for this behavior, held him to account for the fact that multiple characters in the show, for example, tell us that his behavior creeps him out. His ex did dump him, perhaps it wasn't just because she's evil and vindictive and out to get him. Maybe it's because the relationship genuinely didn't work and that it was his fault. Maybe, imagine if he lost the chance to be with the so-called GOAT tier waifu because he was just such like an awful person that nobody wanted to deal with him. Do you think that the people who enjoy Rent-A-Girlfriend would still enjoy it? Or would all that real, honest-to-God criticism and consequences just make them upset and uncomfortable? Would they say this is a feminist show that hates men and this and that? And you might say, well, no, I like Rent a Girlfriend, and I think that if the show was like that, I would be able to handle it, and maybe you would. But we can mouse on over to Princess Connect Redive, which is an isekai that actually subverts the male-led isekai tropes in that its male protagonist is pretty much mute. And he's very weak. He has the bravado and the zeal of a protagonist. He goes in head first to fight, but he's very weak, and he almost always gets his butt kicked, right? It's the three women around him that have the actual power to beat the monsters. His one special super attack is not an attack, it's a supporting spell for the other women who end up doing basically all of the work. They're the star of the show.
And it's legitimately subversive.
And the reason why they were pissed off is because they felt, well, you have a male character, and he's a side character in, quote, his own show, unquote. The male lead is very annoying. There was lots of ableism, but we don't have to get into that. The male lead was this and that. He doesn't talk enough. He doesn't take action enough. He doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. That's the sign of a show that's subversive. It's one that makes you reevaluate your relationship with media.
Right. I think if we talk about what it means to be uncomfortable, it is because something is like contrasting with what you are used to. And a legitimately subversive work will do that. You look at Konosuba, and Konosuba is a show that plays it very safe, right? At no point is Kazuya's like masculinity ever threatened, because he's always like on top of his own subsection. Sure, maybe in the broader context of the world he's at the bottom, but we don't talk about that. We talk about him in relation to his own personal hierarchy. And again, to compare that to Princess Connect Redive, a show that legitimately subverts its relationships.
Four of them have like a really egalitarian relationship. They kind of lead themselves. They make decisions together. It is quite like an interesting experience, and it's very funny.
It's a really good show.
But to bring it back to it's building up to something, you can see then how if something was going to be subversive, it would be built to be subversive, and obviously subversive. I can tell you that in the future, Princess Connect Redive is going to subvert the traditional expectations of masculinity that is found in isekai. And the reason why I know is because the structure of the show subverts the traditional expectations of masculinity.
It is quite literally building up to subvert those expectations, and I don't even think it has to like deliberately do that. No one had to sit down and be like, all right, here are all of the ways we can subvert it.
Yeah, it's not going to grandstand and make some big feminist message at the end or whatever with like flashing pink neon lights about how the patriarchy is bad.
I mean, the patriarchy is bad, and we are feminists here.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have to be so explicit. It is just that to the core. And if you compare that with something like Anos from the Misfit of Demon Academy making some grandstanding message about not being racist, when the show that surrounds him is incredibly racist to the very core.
That's a conversation. Or just like Kazuya and how you're waiting for him to make the grandstand and say that all his past behavior was wrong and that he's now going to improve, when the infrastructure around the show isn't even set up to criticize him in any way. There are two people in the show that criticize Kazuya. It's Mami, who we're told is evil for no reason, and who we're led to believe is like the trash girl, right? Who's just trash and bad all the time. And there's Kazuya himself, which is not real criticism.
Kazuya's self-hatred is always in vague, non-specific terms.
Exactly.
In a way that avoids confronting the specific harm he has caused.
Right. It's always, I'm trash, and not, I hurt you by doing this specific thing.
It's not, because to acknowledge that he hurt people by violating their boundaries would mean that he now knows better.
Mm-hmm.
In a weird way. The specific frame through which he engages in self-loathing absolves him of the responsibility of actually doing better in the future. And so basically, you can pretty clearly tell which shows intend to be subversive, like Decadent, because they will set up for being subversive immediately.
And again, the second episode of Decadence made people not comfortable. It made people say, what is this? I thought this was Attack on Titan. This is not Attack on Titan. I don't like it. I'm leaving.
And like that's again a point of how like genuine legitimate subversion often makes people uncomfortable because it's not what they wanted. A show like Rent a Girlfriend cannot suddenly start asking those questions. Imagine how people would react. Like legitimately, imagine how people would react if Chizuru got an actual personality.
Or if Chizuru got like a boyfriend. Like legitimately, she is pretty and like a competent person. And she apparently has an acting career. If she just got a boyfriend, how would people feel? The last thing I want to say is that so when people say like, oh, don't you know that there's an arc coming up? Don't you know that the light novel isn't finished? This and that. When we criticize things, it's not just that we're criticizing what we see. We're also criticizing the framework and what kinds of arcs that framework allows to happen.
Because the current story is the foundation upon which the next story must be built. So if the current story is like justifying abuse, to suddenly like be like, hey, actually we're all of a sudden against that, like, sure, I would be happy if it happened, but that doesn't function. Mo, clearly you just didn't watch it correctly. I watched Rent a Girlfriend, and I thought it was super woke, hyper progressive.
On this point, I feel like this is a combination of two things. It's, first of all, this comment recognizes that the person who's telling me this watched the show under a different framework that I did, which is good. You have to recognize that. But the second thing it says is that it starts from the conclusion that people have to like the show because the show is good. And then the third thing is that it's trying to like bully me into watching the show with the same framework that they watched it, so that I can come to the same conclusion that they did. I get this a lot from ReZero stands who after I say I didn't really like ReZero, they'll be like, you're watching ReZero wrong. And I'm like, how do you watch a show wrong? And they're like, well, when I watched it, I was like sad about the fact that I felt like worthless and whatever, and I really identified with Subaru, and I really liked Amelia. So just watch it 500 times until you like submit to the framework that made me like it, and then you'll come to the correct opinion about ReZero. But you can't do that.
I think generally speaking, if I like a show, paying more attention will allow me to discover things that I didn't even notice. Very rarely will I rewatch something or reread something and suddenly like get it. Usually because a real life change occurred that shifted my framework to something that was more accepting. If I say, for example, the misfit at Demon Academy is racist, and you say, no, you're just reading it wrong, effectively what you are saying is, it's not racist, you just have to ignore all the racism and then it won't be racist anymore. To which I say, yeah, you're right, but that's not a valid defense of the show.
I have a hard time thinking about watching shows or like reading things in which when I didn't like it the first time, I liked it the second time. I usually, if I like something the first time, I'll like it more the second time. Or if I like something the first time, I won't like it the second time. It would have to be something like you say, like something changed like my internal like values and framework that made me accept something that was not there. Before I was a Marxist, the Communist Manifesto and like any communist literature was just like, to me, it was like really bad. It was like justifying authoritarianism, blah, 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 you know, every liberal excuse in the book. But then I had like a major shift in perspective over like a year or something. And I revisited a lot of those texts and they made a lot of sense and they spoke to me. So that's like, when you say clearly you're watching it wrong, you're asking me to go through like an entire ideological and like personal shift to like match whatever emotional state you're in right now for the sole purpose of giving an anime a good review instead of a bad one. Okay, Raghava. So I know you're talking about rape culture.
I am.
However, did you know that there's another show that hypothetically you would also find is bad? So why aren't you talking about that show?
Well, that's not really the point, is it?
Okay, well. If you also don't like that show, you're also wrong because that show is also good. Please stop saying things. Please, I'm begging. Please.
So this is part of a broader trend of we will talk about something and we will critique it, and then the response will be to do basically what about it? Like, what about this other thing, right? Or like I will say, hey, rape culture is bad, and someone will be like, what about Sword Art Online? Isn't Sword Art Online's rape culture bad? And then I'll be like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, see? And I'm like, you didn't prove anything. The rape culture that exists in Rent a Girlfriend is still bad. It's still bad. And it legitimately hasn't changed. And I feel like this is the important thing of like the existence of other things does not invalidate this thing.
And especially other things being worse does not invalidate this thing. But I think a lot of people they trip up on this. They look for like the most racist, the most sexist, the most problematic shows out there.
And then everything else is fine.
Right. They almost use it. I talked about this a little in Bullshit No Yusha 1 with SAO, and how people will just use the fact that SAO does bad things to like get out their quota for having done critique on anime, and then they'll just like whatever garbage. But
the number of people who will criticize SAO but defend Shield Hero is staggering, and it basically shows that people are a huge fan of you applying rigorous critical analysis to things that they have already accepted are bad. But the moment you start like upholding those standards like evenly across all shows, we're gonna have a fight.
As I was saying, people get they get trapped up in trying to find like the most problematic shows to like take down. But the thing is that if a show wears problematic politics on its sleeve, less people like it.
See, Conception.
Yes, Conception is the...
See, that Conception thing was foreshadowing. Real quick, it's worth talking about, like, Conception is obviously a bad show with terrible politics, but it's also not popular because the politics it has are really obvious.
Conception, basically, it was bankrolled by the Japanese government to be a propaganda game and a propaganda anime for kids to have like heterosexual baby making sex. It does not lie to you about what it does.
Right, and I would go a step further to argue that the politics of Conception and the politics of Rent a Girlfriend are basically the same.
Right.
Rent a Girlfriend is just more subtle about it, so people who don't share those politics can like either like they don't notice or like they ignore it or whatever. But Conception, it is so obviously problematic that it's not really worth talking about beyond to acknowledge that it's obviously problematic.
Right. And so when people will say like, well, why are you coming after this show when this show is worse? Why are you doing Shield Hero when Death March to a Parallel World Rhapsody is worse? Why are you doing ReZero when like Terraform Mars is worse? Like the reason why is because it is not just about it's not just about it's not just about the fact that the anime is problematic. It's also about who internalizes those ideas, how many people, to what rate, how well does the show proliferate these bad ideas. And if there's a show that's not that bad but proliferates really bad ideas to like a large group of people, that's far more worth my time than some low budget, overworked animation team cranking out propaganda for I don't know,
A show they don't even agree with. I do not think we will ever discuss Terraform Mars because it is just not worth it and no one cares. But we will probably talk about Rent a Girlfriend because Rent a Girlfriend is popular. And that's not just us being grifters and we want to talk about the most popular thing to get clicks. That's us talking about the media that has the most impact on people. Because it's important to talk about the impact media has on people. That's why we made this podcast.
Like, again, just going back to the whole idea of, like, if anime is important to you, then you also have to accept the fact that anime says things. And if you have a revolutionary bone in your body, then you would also accept the fact that we want anime to say good things that make the world a better place. I think overall, it kind of sounds like we're being a little bit petty with our first ever podcast just being flaming people who bother us online. Just flaming the arguments that people use to bother us online. In that sort of sense, it could kind of be like, why put the effort in recording, re-recording, editing, making a logo, getting people together? And I don't know. I think it comes down to multiple things. First of all, just because I'm passionate about it. Raghu's passionate about it. There doesn't. I don't think there needs to be any bigger thing than that, but there are other things. Going back to where we were at the beginning, which is that if you think that anime is important, then you must accept the fact that anime can say things. And if you think that anime can say things, then it has an effect on us both as individuals and our feelings, but also on our culture and on the systems and hierarchies that run our society, both nationally and internationally, wherever we might live. And so ultimately, we just kind of hope that doing this, besides filling a passion that we have for anime critical theory and media analysis, is just being able to fill, I think, an ever-growing need of I don't want to say proving to people, but helping people understand that there's more to political analysis and like nerd culture and weeb culture than just complaining about SJWs. We can definitely provide a more meaningful and happier experience than what is offered on the kind of reactionary side of the spectrum, both on YouTube and everywhere else. There are 5 million podcasts, but few, I think, that will be like ours.
And with that, I think we are at our close. I am Raghava Kavali. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. You can follow me on Twitter at KranasAngel. That's KRANAS Angel. Don't ask why I have that handle. It's not important.
I'm Mo Black, he, him, his. If you liked what you heard here, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. You can follow me on Medium and follow me on Twitter. Links to all of those are in the description. I have a Patreon. Thanks to everyone who's supporting me so far. That's going to be in the description as well. It's the one that's linked to this podcast, so if you want to support the podcast financially, that would be the best way to do it. We also have a Discord server that is set up both for this podcast and in general for another nice leftist anime community to just kind of have and to just kind of be able to do things. So make sure you join that. That will also be in the description of wherever you're listening to this.
Yeah. And with that, I would like to close finally by asking Mo, what are you looking forward to in this coming week?
So I've also recorded Bullshit No Yusha 2.5, which, in case you don't know, is where I do ReZero Frozen Bonds in a little bit more detail, and I kind of connect how it treats Amelia to the ongoing Black Lives Matter protests. It was kind of an essay that was created in the midst of bad anime defenses, yes, but I ultimately think the essay that came out of it is really strong, and I can't wait for you guys to hear it. I'm also writing the essay on the Misfitted Demon Academy. So if you listen to us talk about the Misfitted Demon Academy and how it was racist or whatever, and you're like, huh, what, how, who, where? I thought the show was. Don't worry, I will have a full, detailed breakdown of why exactly I hate that show. It's not just that, but you know, a full deep dive into the Misfitted Demon Academy and all the ways that it is frustrating, coming out at soon as well. And how about you? What are you looking forward to this week?
Maybe getting some rest for the first time in forever. And so, for those of you who stayed and listened to the entire thing, thank you. We really appreciate you.
Thanks so much.
And it has been a pleasure. Hope to see you again next week.